Today we're going to be taking a look at the Bugaboo Fox, or rather we're going to be taking a second look, because last year when the Fox first came out, we did a series of comparison videos on it and a longer video about 3 areas of its design that worried us, but we never got around to giving the model its own proper review. Now, with more than a year's worth of hindsight and our disappointment over the discontinuation of the Buffalo behind us, it's time to give the Fox its due. Despite replacing the Buffalo as a somewhat smaller big brother to the Chameleon and Bee, the Fox is not a true all-terrain stroller. It's simply too small to compete in the same class with the likes of the Stoka Trails or the Amalunga NXT90. That being said, the Fox does have several advantages over virtually every other stroller in the medium class. In fact, I'd go far as to say that though I feel they went totally cuckoo with regards to its mechanical design, the Bugaboo Fox is really the only medium class reversible seat 4-wheel swivel wheel stroller that I would consider for my own use. Before we get into it though, here are some stats. The Fox weighs just under 10 kilos. It's 66 by 54 by 19 centimeters when folded. It can take up to 17 kilos in the seat and 10 kilos in the underslung shopping basket. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of the mechanisms on this model, let's talk a little bit about its functionality. In all respects with the Fox, I would say the main theme is that it is way overthought. In some ways this is a good thing, in some ways it's bad. On the good end, what you'll get out of using the stroller, when it's functioning as intended that is a very smooth experience. Everything you need out of a premium stroller of this size is present. It has a decent sized seat and bassinet, a canopy with good coverage, it's foldable with the seat attached, has a decent sized accessible shopping basket, comfortable buttons and triggers, and well above average drivability for its class. In fact, check it out. Looking just at the chassis, do you see how from the handle downwards the whole stroller sort of spreads itself outwards into a wide footprint? This design, coupled with its internal suspension and large wheels, makes for a very comfortable ride across light terrain. We'll talk more about this when we talk mechanics, but I wanted you to get an idea of this angle from the very beginning, as it shows a focus in the overall structure of this stroller towards the most important mechanical area of really any stroller in my opinion, where the tires meet the road. These factors are not all there is to functionality though, unfortunately, and there are a couple of negatives to point out before moving on. Firstly, folding. There are 2 points at which the Fox can be folded, up at the handles and along the central bar. The idea with this, according to Bugaboo, was to make for an easier one-hand fold that could be accomplished with the seat attached. You see, both of the triggers activate the same long train of interlocking parts in the central locking mechanism from opposite ends. And in my experience, folding the stroller, in particular if you're trying to get it as flat as possible, can be a bit fiddly, even from the outset. I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but the tactile feeling of activating the triggers feels more like fragile than on other Bugaboo models. And the triggers don't always catch all the internal elements necessary for folding the stroller in an equally symmetrical manner, at least with consistency. Secondly, regarding functionality, is the textiles. In my opinion, they moved over to a somewhat inferior material with the canopies. And in addition to this, the textiles are significantly more difficult to remove than on all their other models, with the exception of the Bee. Switching from the seat to the bag is also more difficult than on past models, involving multiple mechanical elements that need to be removed or mounted on the frame, in addition to the textiles themselves. Granted, switching from the bag to the seat and vice versa is not a procedure that you'll need to do often, but still, it's overthinking, right? I'm telling you, that's the whole theme of this model. Okay, let's talk mechanics then, top to bottom. Starting with the handle then. There are a few improvements over past designs. One of them is to have the continuous handle as opposed to the plastic joints on the side. This increases the overall sturdiness and stability of the handle itself because you don't have joints at which the metal poles can wear down and get a bit loose on. Secondly is that you can replace out the leather handles if they wear down, which is something that they haven't done on previous models either. They have kept the same handle height adjustment mechanism, which is quite a solid handle height adjustment mechanism and is pretty much the same across their range. Another mechanism that I'm not as pleased about them keeping is these white triggers here that activates a wire inside, pull up on a wire in order to activate the central locking mechanism. And on virtually all Bugaboo models that have this system, which is pretty much all of them other than the Chameleon, you do sometimes have problems with this white trigger breaking on the inside whenever that central locking mechanism gums up and the wire does not want to be pulled, and then instead of pulling the wire, it breaks the inside of that mechanism. Okay, the central locking mechanism, which is really the most complicated and I guess most important mechanism on really any Bugaboo stroller. I'll say the one positive thing about Bugaboo central locking mechanisms and the Fox central locking mechanism in particular first, and that is it is really one of the few stroller manufacturers that has actually managed to build suspension into the central locking mechanism and into the overall structure and way that the stroller is put together, rather than having a large dedicated rear suspension unit. So most Bugaboo strollers will not have a large dedicated rear suspension unit, including the Fox, but it still feels quite suspended. I still wouldn't use it on anything other than light terrain at the most. It's not an all-terrain stroller, but that is kind of cool that they built the suspension into the central locking mechanism. On the other hand, the degree of micro complexity is what I would call it within this is just staggering. So there are, I don't know, 20, 30 different interlocking parts in here with a wide variety of springs, many as small and of about the same tensile strength as those you would find in a ballpoint pen, all inside this mechanism. And all of them have to function symmetrically in a clockwork type fashion for the stroller to continue working as intended. And we have another video where we actually take apart this mechanism and show you how it works. I would recommend, if you're interested, going and looking at that video so you can see what I'm talking about. It's quite ridiculous how many small moving parts are actually involved in here, especially in comparison to other Bugaboo models. So I would call that almost a nightmare from a structural and longevity point of view, the complexity within the central locking mechanism and the potential for problems down the line. Okay, with the suspension mainly being dealt with again in the central locking mechanism, looking at the rear end is going to be mostly about the brake system. And this is the first Bugaboo model that has this on-off brake system. The other ones have all been, you flip it down, you put it on, you flip it up, you flip it off. And that allows for, again, a greater deal of simplicity when you have that sort of brake system that they had before than when you have this on-off brake system. And the Fox is pretty new, so we haven't seen a lot of trouble with this brake system yet, but Upper Baby Vista has had this sort of a brake system for quite a while now, and it is one of the areas of the stroller that does have a tendency to go wrong quite often. We have done some videos where we take apart these lower feet, and if you're interested, I would again recommend you look at that in addition to the central locking mechanism video, again simply to see how many small parts are in here. Because when you're looking at it, and if you have some idea of how a stroller is put together, you really wouldn't think that the whole thing would be made up of much smaller movable parts that are all put together in order to get this system working. But it is in fact. And again, you're going to have this problem with micro complexity and the sort of longevity issues that you're going to get from that, because just one thing gets misaligned or there's a bit of grit gets in there and all of a sudden you have multiple small parts that are going to be damaged. When it's functioning properly, I suppose it is kind of nice to have the on-off, at least they call it sort of a flip-flop brake system, meaning you can wear sandals and put it on off. But in my opinion, from a mechanical point of view, it's not worth the trade-off of the added complexity in the system. Okay, looking at the front end, there is a certain degree of suspension built into this fork. There is usually on front swivel wheel models. I very much like the size of the front wheels. That is a really big thing with four-wheel swivel wheel strollers, and in terms of drivability, is to have large front wheels. However, on the front end, a couple things that I don't like. Number one is the swivel lock mechanism. It's a very simplistic sort of design with this peg that pops up and fits into a well. It's a very thin, small peg, and is definitely inferior to all of the other swivel lock designs that I've seen on Bugaboo so far. It is something I expect to see problems with. Number two is that there actually is no inbuilt protection against wobbly wheel syndrome. What wobbly wheel syndrome is, that's a word that I made up, but what it has to do with is that over time, the axle widens out the channel inside the front housing, the wheel becomes a bit looser, and then when you try to go at like slightly higher than average speeds, the wheel begins to wobble uncontrollably. Now, the Buffalo had a great suspension pad that pressed down onto the front fork and prevented this sort of damage from occurring. They have not transferred that design over onto the Fox. And while Bugaboo generally does not have a lot of trouble with wobbly problems, other than early generation B models, it is something that I would anticipate seeing in the future. And I have seen 1 or 2 cases in the workshop already, but generally this sort of a problem doesn't occur before 2, 3, 4 years, depending on how hard people are using the stroller. Okay, just a couple notes on the wheels themselves. Bugaboo in general has really, really good wheels. They have the foam filled tires, and they also have that raised ridge on the outside of the tire, which allows the ridge to wear down before the tire starts to wear down, and also somehow creates a much smoother driving experience because you have kind of this thinner line, I think, where the stroller is actually meeting the road. So in general, I don't really have any problems with Bugaboo wheels. They have done this thing where you can remove the hubcaps and put on different colors. And again, it's like the overthinking thing, but people like that, you know. So there's a lot of style customization possible with the Fox. From a mechanical point of view, it's not good, it's not bad. You can switch out the hubcaps. I did want to make one more note mechanically in general, and that has to do with driving. So you do have decent sized wheels, you do have that suspension in the central locking mechanism, but because you also have this micro complexity inside where all that suspension is going to have to occur, and also because you have that lack of inbuilt protection against wobbly wheel problems in the front wheels, this stroller is going to feel more terrain capable than the terrain you should take it on, at least if you're buying it new. So if you hold yourself to city streets and you hold yourself to smooth dirt roads and don't really try to take it on forest trails over roots and all this kind of stuff, and you don't overdo the weight conditions, this stroller will last a bit longer than it would otherwise. So just because it feels very smooth to drive, which is one of the positive things about this model, does not mean that you should overdo it in terms of which terrain you take it on. So the question you might be asking yourself now is, if I have all these criticisms of the mechanical design of the Fox, why did I say that it's the only medium-sized reversible seat 4-wheel swivel wheel stroller that I would consider using myself? The answer is that, assuming I have $1,500 to blow on an asset guaranteed to significantly depreciate in value, the Fox is simply that nice to use in comparison to all the other strollers in its class. I feel the same way about the Fox as I do about the Donkey for double strollers, which has now also shown itself to have a definite life cap at around 5 or 6 years. While you're using these strollers and they're working as intended, their functionality, drivability, the level of comfort they provide is simply unmatched elsewhere on the market, even though there are several other strollers consisting of simpler and sturdier mechanisms. In any case, we hope this video has been interesting to you, and if it has been, we ask you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.